You're listening to the Joy of Champagne podcast, your guide to the world of sparkling wines. And now your host, Deniz Bayram.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Joy of Champagne. I'm your host, Deniz Bayram. If you're a regular listener, which we thank you very much for, you will know that up until now, we've been talking a lot about the champagne method lately, discussing all the aspects of how specifically champagne from France is produced. This method is far from simple and primitive. But what about the simpler method of producing sparkling wines, the so-called ancestral method, as we've also mentioned before? We haven't really focused enough on that since. After all, it is the original way sparkling wines used to be produced before the process was refined to make sparkling champagne. In fact, what if I told you that the primitive ancestral method has been making a comeback lately? That's right. The wine lovers of the world are crazy about these kinds of sparkling wines lately, the kind which is all full of cloudy, unfiltered dead lees inside. You might even have encountered it yourself, but haven't realized it because it is now known by a different name. I'm talking about Pét-Nat wines. Pét-Nat is simply the abbreviation for Pétillant Naturel, which simply translates as naturally sparkling in French. The name might be different or new to you, but the essential process is what we know as ancestral method. They are the same thing. You might have noticed that Pét-Nat wines are associated with the natural wine movement as well, which is a whole different subject. More like a bottomless well, which we can have several episodes on. But the main philosophy behind natural wine is making wine with no or very little human interference and additions. So Pét-Nat requires a natural wine that has not finished fermenting before anything else. The reason why there really isn't any conventionally made Pét-Nats around is because, first, the whole philosophy is against the control that is applied in conventional winemaking, and second, it's because cultured yeasts that are added into to make wine, which are the same kind that we use to make bread and beer as well, those yeasts are very vigorous and active, so they are too unstable and fast for making Pét-Nat, which requires a slow, mellow fermentation that can only be obtained by using wild yeast. So, when it comes to making sparkling wine, Pét-Nat is the simplest and hence also historically the first way of making sparkling wine. Because what is required is simply the bottling of the wine before the wine is completely fermented to dryness. Of course, with a good amount of sugar still present from the fruit. This, of course, results with the yeast, which continues the fermentation, being trapped inside the bottle, and eventually dying and forming the cream-colored sediment we call lees, which are almost always visible inside the bottle. There's even a debate within the fans of Pét-Nat wines if you should mix the lees before drinking it by gently shaking the bottle, or if you should wait for them to completely settle onto the bottom of the bottle. The only difference I find is simply the look of the wine, as it gets cloudy when the lees are stirred mixing. But why Pét-Nat is popular now? After all, it's such a primitive method of making sparkling wine, and why is it necessary when we have more complex and arguably superior methods like the champagne method? The reason is the awareness us consumers are having throughout the last decade about organic, unspoiled, and natural products that are not manipulated by humans. Pét-Nat perfectly fits into this category, as you cannot add any additives into the wine since you want the yeast to live along after you bottle it. And after bottling, you virtually cannot do anything until it's open to be drunk. So in a way, it's an anathema for other sparkling wines, but that's what makes it attractive and very interesting. Especially in our day and age, where everything seems to be overly manipulated and even artificial. And I'm sad to say, but some of the most popular champagne brands and their wines fit into this description. So what Pét-Nat offers is a simple, raw, and natural version of sparkling wine. Back to basics. And indeed, simple can be very beautiful. So how different are Pét-Nats? To start, they look a little different because of the unfiltered lees, but the real difference comes in taste and texture. As expected, Pét-Nats are vibrant in fruit and more restrained in their yeasty profile, since they don't spend extended periods aging with lots of lees, like champagne. Let alone they don't even have cultured yeast added to them by humans. But the fermentation happens with wild yeast, which is usually already present in the air or comes from the skins of the grapes themselves. This gives Pét-Nats a pure flavor profile that reflects the real flavor of the grape, as well as having a few naturally occurring aromas like wild herbs, lanolin, and barnyard aromas, and other aromas and flavors you can associate with the wild country life on a farm. But what I love the most is that Pét-Nats can show elegance and delicate notes that otherwise you won't be able to get in conventional sparkling wine. Most notably, floral and herbaceous notes like tarragon, lavender, and all other aromatic herbs and flowers you can pretty much think of. And of course, there are the bubbles. The bubbles in Pét-Nats are almost always less than the traditional method sparkling wines, since the wild yeast isn't a cultured and a lab-engineered yeast to create such high amounts of carbonation. Besides, don't forget that no additional sugar is added as well, so the real art of making Pét-Nat is the timing of the bottling. Because if you bottle too early, you run the risk of overpressurizing the bottle, as there will be more sugar to ferment. But if you bottle too late, then there won't be enough bubbles to make any difference. So these wines may seem obscure, but in fact they're made in the most primitive way, which equally requires great care to make. So who makes Pét-Nats? They're incredibly widespread among Europe, especially France, Austria, and Italy take the lead. Spain follows closely after. They were first popularized by winemakers in the Loire Valley in northwest France. Today, virtually almost all natural or biodynamic wine producer makes a Pét-Nat in one way or another. Not because it's very fashionable, but they're very fun to drink and can be very complex in times. Last but not least, where can you find them? Well, the truth be told, don't expect to find Pét-Nats in your local supermarket. But this doesn't mean that they are out of your reach. If you go to your local wine shop and ask for a Pét-Nat, chances are that they will have it and will be happy to show you as well. Or they will direct you to the closest store who have Pét-Nats. Also, do understand that Pét-Nats might not involve a lengthy complex process like the champagne method, but they can carry a similar price tag as some champagnes. This is because natural farming and winemaking are costlier than conventional wine growing. Understand that you'll be paying for the natural and the unspoiled aspect of the wine. Have you tried a Pét-Nat before? If you have, what do you think? If you haven't, then go out there and look for it and let us know what you think of it. Remember that natural wines can vary in terms of quality and flavor profile, since they don't have any additives. So do not give up on the first bottle you try if you end up not liking it. After all, the price to pay to have natural wines and Pét-Nats is the occasional inconsistencies and flaws. Share your thoughts with us by shooting us an email at hello@joyofchampagne.com. Thank you for listening, and until next time, stay bubbly.
Before we end, a word from our sponsors. This episode of the Joy of Champagne podcast was brought to you by
The Excelsior by Dukes, one of the world's finest champagne flutes. 10.7 inches tall with a 10-ounce capacity. handcrafted and mouth-blown, lead-free crystal glass. Find out more at clubdukes.co. That's spelled CLUBDUX.co. Because there are some things man can make better than any machine.
Thanks for listening to the Joy of Champagne podcast, your guide to the world of sparkling wines. We hope you join us on the next episode. In the meantime, feel free to visit us at joyofchampagne.com or drop us an email at hello@joyofchampagne.com.